Okay, well, thank you for your generosity. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, um, Justina Acevedo-Cross. She is the program director at the Hawaii Community Foundation and the principal staff on the implementation of the Promising Minds Initiative, including managing grants, contracts, evaluation activities, and the coordination of the community of practice of providers for the last 3 years. Ms. Acevedo-Cross specializes in policy and systems change and network design and implementation. She has more than 15 years of nonprofit, foundation, board, and cross-sector experience to draw from for projects. Prior to joining the Hawaii Community Foundation, Justina was a program officer for the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and was instrumental in the strategy design and implementation for early learning and expanded learning initiatives across California. Prior to joining the Packard Foundation, Justina worked in a nonprofit sector as a strategic communications professional for small and mid-sized organizations. She has served as policy consultant for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco and CFED. Justina has experience serving on nonprofit boards and government commissions. She currently is an appointed member of the Hawaii State's Early Learning Board. She has an MPP from UC Berkeley and a BA from Scripps College. She is originally from Kailua, Hawaii. Justina, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with your club today. It's actually a great time to be here. So bear with me for just a minute while I get my screen sharing going. Great. And I did just want to chime in that I like that some of your happy dollars are for seeing Kolea, because the Koleas just a week and a half ago returned to our house too. So it's been really nice to see them. And it's just my son has now gotten quite excited about bird watching. I think we have a little budding naturalist on our hands. So today I wanted to share a little bit with you about, I think we're hearing a lot about this term, the new normal. And I've been thinking, actually, we have this real chance right now to build a better normal and a better normal for our kids and families. That's what I wanted to talk with you a little bit about. And I'm going to talk about it in context of our work here at the Hawaii Community Foundation, and one example through the work I'm leading through the Promising Minds Initiative. And that's actually how I first had the opportunity to meet Lorraine and Jolie, and also Michelle, who's on the call, which is really nice. So by the end of the talk, I hope that you will understand a few ways that you could lend support to a neighbor, child, or family. To me, this is critical because as Rotarians, I know that you truly believe in the power of community service, both locally and internationally. And there's simple things that really can be done that make such a big difference right now. And the second part is walking away with an understanding of what might be underlying some of that stressed out behavior that you're seeing. That might be a yelling parent in a grocery store, a frustrated child, maybe a crying fit. And if you take nothing else away, just knowing that behavior is communication, and there's often things that are underlying that behavior. And just by knowing that, there's actually greater understanding. And why is this so relevant right now? We all know, and the reason we're on Zoom instead of me traveling from Oahu to Hilo right now is that our island communities are struggling with the effects of COVID-19. And that means for some families, their lives are really being turned upside down. Our slowed economy has moved more families into deeper poverty, and the need to stay at home often exacerbates, causes an uptick that we start seeing in domestic violence. Parents who struggle with substance abuse or mental illness may find that their conditions are exacerbated by these increased pressures, the increased stress that life is having. But before I get into that, I really want to just share a little bit of background on Hawaii Community Foundation, which is kind of how this work is located that we're doing. So We've been around for 104 years in Hawaii. It originally started as the Hawaiian Foundation. It was established in 1916, renamed Hawaii Community Foundation more appropriately in 1987. And what we really do is partnering with funders and civic leaders to tackle major issues of our day. We help nonprofit organizations achieve better results, and also we do things like provide scholarships so that our young people can go back and return from college or whatever training they've had to hopefully contribute here in Hawaii. Just as a side note, actually, for me, it's really come full circle because I was a scholarship awardee from Hawaii Community Foundation, which allowed me to go to college. And it's pretty exciting that now I get to work at the place that I didn't know much about back when I was a college student. We have 72 employees and they're across all islands. So just you all may be familiar with that we do have a Hilo office. It was established, it's one of our newer offices, established in 2015. But Hawaii Island has one of our distinct places in the Hawaii Community Foundation work because it was actually the first established neighbor island office that was there in Waimea that opened in 2000. So it's had a really nice long history around neighbor island connection for the work of the Hawaii Community Foundation. On Hawaii Island itself, we have 103 different funds that benefit Hawaii Island. Those are things like the East Hawaii Fund, the West Hawaii Fund, and the Kukio Community Fund. I tried to look up some of the numbers because I know you would be curious about the stuff going on Hawaii Island. So we've done over 16 million in grant making to nonprofits on Hawaii Island in the past 3 years. And part of that, I said 16 million, yes. And over 1.6 of that is scholarships awards to 270 students just last year. The way that we do our work is through these core areas. We're focused on building a thriving Hawaii for always, and we're positioned to do that through being a catalyst for change. I want to share a little bit with you about our change framework and how that helps us kind of guide the work that we do across the islands. We hope that together in the work that we do, we're really igniting the power for partnership. We believe in doing our work that way. And also the other piece of that is, of course, amplifying the power of giving. So just like your happy dollars, which helps to amplify the power of giving, the Hawaii Community Foundation has a commitment to that so that we can really bring those dollars back into community. So these are kind of 4 main ways that we do it: partnership building, amplifying the power of giving, investing in communities, and inspiring collective action. And just to give you a sense of what we've done over the last couple years, we've awarded 6.3 million in grants and contracts just in 2019. Don't have the new numbers for 2020 yet, and 7.3 of those are scholarships, which are really critical for all of our students here. I did want to call attention to one thing that has been important in 2020 with the hit of the coronavirus pandemic. We stood up the Hawaii Community Foundation, we stood up the Hawaii Resilience Fund, which is part of Hawaii Community Foundation in partnership with Pierre and Pam Omidyar. And through that, we've been able to distribute $12 million in grants to the community, starting with things that were really in kind of a first phase of rapid response and relief, things like getting testing centers set up, distributing food to food banks. But we've also done things like we knew there was a big gap around support for childcare for essential workers, and we did small grants to home-based childcare providers. Actually, many providers based in that Hilo area, I recall, getting grant awards so that they could keep their businesses, their tiny businesses that they operate out of their home, operational. And the framing of how we do our work is we know firmly that philanthropy cannot solve Hawaii's biggest issues alone. If we're actually going to create large-scale change, we need to do that together. And we're doing that through what we are considering these 6 essential sectors of the community and of response in order to help all people. And we really do mean all people thrive across Hawaii. So the sectors that you see across the page there, each letter of change stands for a different sector. We have community economy, health and wellness, where I do a lot of my work and where some of the work that I'm going to tell you about through Promising Minds is situated. Arts and culture, N for natural environment, government and civics, and E for education, which spans everything from early learning all the way through higher education, which we think about as, you know, part of that package is really our scholarship program. And just want to say, you know, the big idea behind the change framework is that by using a common set of data, we can create partnerships that commit to a shared goal and align efforts in order for us to take that step forward and take collective action together. So I think, did I cover? That's a little bit of the background on Hawaii Community Foundation, but I wanted to give that to you so that you kind of understand where this piece around what we can do for our kids in building the better normal is situated. So last year in 2019, we launched the Promising Minds initiative. It's a 3-year initiative that's really designed to support kids and families who may have experienced trauma or any sort of early adversity. And we know a lot of these approaches and strategies are good for all kids. But what I want to talk to you about today, because I actually think this is the more important takeaway, is why we decided this initiative called Promising Minds is so critical. Why is this concept of supporting our kids in those earliest years when they're birth to 5 and their families be able to be on a good path around social emotional development? So that's what I'm going to share with you. And now with the coronavirus pandemic, I'm seeing ways that this work it surfaces and it feels even more relevant. It also feels more relevant, and I'm so glad that you invited me to share a little bit, because there's things that each one of us can do. It doesn't take someone who's a neuroscientist to do this work. It doesn't take someone who has a social work degree even, although we need a lot more of people who are doing both of those things and focused on young kids as well. With that, I do want to share, I'm not expert in the topic. I became an expert and learned to kind of learn all what I'm sharing with you today over the course of, you know, the last 5 years or so, when I've got quite interested in early brain development, in what's important for kids and families as they develop. And so hopefully that gives you a sense of, one, there's a lot more I can learn, but two, that there's things that we all can learn and know how to do. So the why behind why do we start this Promising Minds initiative? We know and we knew that it was critical here in Hawaii, just like all kids across the country, that a child's early experiences shape the architecture of their brain, and that negative experiences actually can impair health over both in the early years, but also cumulative over a lifetime. So what we learned and what we saw in the data is that approximately 1/3 of our children are at risk of developing a mental health challenge. And there's things that we can absolutely do about that. It's 1/3 of our kids is a big number when you're talking about our littlest ones. So we know that one piece of that is promoting and helping support more trauma-informed environments. Those could be childcare settings, any sort of home visiting environment, basically a whole gamut of settings and environments that kids and families often frequent. And why, I guess, why is it so early to kind of catch, or why is it so important early to catch? And I'm going to go into that in the second slide a little bit. But without some of the early supports, all of this results in a late diagnosis and treatment of mental health. And that often puts wear and tear on and extra costs on special education, mental health services, juvenile justice, incarceration. And much of that could be avoided by choosing to invest early. And I'm going to move into my next slide here. So this is, again, why we thought the Hawaii Community Foundation really felt it was imperative for us to get involved in this work. This is a pyramid that talks about averse childhood experiences, which is research that has been done in California initially, and now there's been a lot more global research on the topic, but initially was done with Kaiser Permanente patients in California. And what they found is any number of these 10 averse childhood experiences led to lifetime effects, and including health effects, which was really surprising and groundbreaking to learn in the medical profession. But if you look there at this, the way to look at the pyramid is the purple part of the pyramid down below where it says early adversity, early childhood experiences that are negative. Those lead to things like social cognitive impairment, which then can lead to a child or as an adult adopting perhaps more risky behaviors. And then we see some of the ripple effects on health outcomes, including things that people thought never were going to be related to social emotional development, like cardiovascular disease, like diabetes, and even leading to early death. They were able to show through some of the study on adverse childhood experiences that the more numbers of kind of these negative experiences you had, you actually tended to have early death. So that was very groundbreaking research. And to bring it back home to Hawaii, we also know that half of our children, so this is not a minority situation here that we're talking about. About half of our children have experienced at least one adverse childhood event in their life, with 20% experiencing 2 or more adverse childhood experiences. We also know that Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander children experience ACEs at a higher rate. And there's some talk, I just wanted to mention, there's some talk right now of actually including just the stress put on by the coronavirus pandemic, almost like an automatic early adversity that you would count. So I think jury's out whether or not that will be, bundled as part of some of the early adversity, but I just did want to put out there that right now it's a very universal experience to be experiencing some of the stressors that come with being in a pandemic. And so I say all this, and it sounds like a drag. But what I want you to take away from this is ACE scores and trauma do not determine who you are and what your life will end up like. Yes, they, real stress and trauma, especially ongoing, increase risk for different health factors and lifetime outcomes, but there's also ways to buffer and combat against that. And that's what I want to share with you a little bit. So let's move into a little bit more of that. So addressing ACEs actually does use brain science. And I'm not going to, this is the work of Daniel Siegel, if you get really interested in that, is a really great starter on kind of understanding whole brain and like how does the brain function and affect how we behave, how we kind of move through our daily life. But I do want to just kind of go through one exercise that you can learn and you can actually teach, if there's any kids in your life, if there's other adults in your life. I actually showed this to my spouse with my kids because I thought it was so neat. But this is called the hand model of the brain. And so it's really easy and you can do it with me. But if you hold up your hand, either one of your hands, and don't worry, nobody's going to watch you on Zoom, but you can use your hand actually as a model for the brain. And your thumb area, basically, that's your limbic region. And so that's the hippocampus, the amygdala. We don't need to worry about the fancy scientific names of it, but what we call this often for when we're teaching kids or just to have easier understanding is we say this is the downstairs brain. So all this part that's like in here. And so we're going to kind of fold that in and then make your brain. See, I haven't done this on Zoom, but there we go. Yeah, it kind of looks like a brain. And then this part, the brain stem and spinal cord down here, but if you rub your hand over the top, that's your cerebral cortex. And that's what we call the upstairs brain. And the upstairs brain is actually the part that allows us to think before we act. So it allows us to have concentration, it allows us to have self-awareness, empathy, decision-making, planning. I think in our best selves, we often want to be operating in that upstairs brain part. But there's things that happen in our life, and there's actually very real, historical reasons why we have that downstairs brain, this part that's right here. Sometimes people call it flipping the lid. That's another thing you can think of. So when you flip your lid, you have a big emotional reaction. Some of that has a purpose. You might have heard of fight, flight, and freeze. If there's a bear chasing you, you need to get away from that bear, and you actually need to have your body basically kick in and take over. So that bottom part of your brain allows you to do that, kind of go on autopilot in a lot of ways. But what's challenging about that is if this is your constant state, this is unhealthy, because it pumps, different kinds of things, the cortisol levels and things through your body that can have real negative impacts down the road. One thing to know, and kind of tying it to your learning around education this month, is you can't learn when your lid is flipped like this and you're just in this emotional state. So I do think, baseline, it's really good to know a little bit about how the brain functions. And when you're like this, rationalizing is not going to work. I tried this with my 4-year-old, and you try and talk him down from a crying fit. It doesn't work. You actually have to wait till he calms down, and then he's able to kind of engage this part of his brain. And then I'm actually able to get somewhere. So and I did want to say, when your downstairs brain is taking over and it takes over a long period of time, that's called toxic stress. And I'm going to give you a little analogy for toxic stress. So, okay, so this picture here, you see a truck, you see a bunch of cargo. My son loves trucks right now. This is my 2-year-old, so I thought this would be a good analogy to share with you. So you can think about toxic stress like very heavy cargo that goes onto a shipping truck. And a truck can only haul so much before it slows down and can go no further. So in short, it becomes overloaded, and it causes it to have a lot of wear and tear. For people, challenging life circumstances, and right now we know those are things like losing a job, losing housing, or having serious illness, that can also overload and weigh people down, like the weight that sits on this cargo truck. So all of us, everyone from Keiki to Kapuna, can wear down without the support we need during the heavy times. And that's when we're overloaded. And this is all a stress response, like a real stress response from the brain into the body. We know that it can adversely affect brain development, cognition, and academic skills, ability to acquire knowledge, even language acquisition. So children and families who are constantly facing the wear and tear, they do better with supports to reduce those stressors in their life. And basically the two things we can do is, if we can reduce the stressors in someone's life and also increase the positive relationships that they have around them, usually with like a caring adult, those make the biggest difference. And I know I'm bumping up against time, so I'm gonna make sure to share a little bit about the benevolent childhood experiences with you, because this is the good news part. So I've spent a lot of time on what seems like the inevitable, but I really want you to take away, our brains are very plastic, our bodies are very resilient, and we can do a lot to kind of change and buffer against these early adversity. So it's not a fixed reality. Early adversity happens, and we can help to change that. Every one of us on this call, we all can play a role. Research has really shown that children can grow up to be healthy and resilient adults despite experiencing any early adversity. And how do we do that? So for the youngest among us, I pulled up some of these. What you see is a list of 5, or what are called benevolent childhood experiences. These feel like really regular things, and things that each of us may be able to do, 1 or 2 with someone who might be in our life. Have a caring friend or a neighbor who is caring, have beliefs that comfort the child. Even having things like a predictable home routine helps to buffer against some of these early experiences. The other one is around feeling connected at school if they're in school environment. And that even goes for distance learning. So if they feel connected to their teacher and their peers or someone else at school, that can go a very long way. I'm nearly done with my talk. I did just want to take away the things we can be doing right now, or we can be encouraging young people's questions, validating their feelings, providing providing comfort and an extra bit of patience. This is a good reminder for me as a parent of 2 young kids. I actually do need to engage a little extra patience through this time that we're facing right now. And if we do all that, our keiki, and have the keiki have extra care, they'll be better able to bounce back in the long term. So thank you. And if you're interested in getting more involved, there's ways that are fairly easy to connect online, including a new digital platform called ACES Connection Hawaii, which is just for people who are interested in learning more about early childhood adversity and what could be done about that. So that's just started, and there's quite a number of folks on Hawaii Island who've been connected into that work. And with that, I will end, and I leave you with my contact information. Lorraine also knows very much how to find me, and I welcome you reaching out or any comments. I'm very passionate about this topic, and hope we can all make a better normal for all of our kids going forward.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions?
This is Mary. I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to commend you on your passion is clear and very well communicated. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is Virginia. I have one question. Having been involved in First Things First in Arizona for early childhood experiences where they talk about a lot of the things that you've talked about today, I was just wondering if you work with the school system, with the early childhood centers, with training for people who work with children, young children a lot?
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to share with you guys the why, but the kind of how that Hawaii Community Foundation is supporting some of this work is we've been organizing communities of practice of what I'm terming transdisciplinary practitioners now. And that's a really fancy word for saying everyone from folks who work with very young babies, with newborn moms who as home visitors, to people who are preschool teachers in a variety of settings. And there's a bunch, kind of a range in between of different early childhood settings that are incredibly important in Hawaii. And we're working with them to understand some trauma-informed strategies and how they might do things like change their environment, partner with families a little bit differently to understand what might be behind behavior. And I actually think, if anyone on the call who's participated in one of the Promising Minds communities, you guys could chime in too. But that's one of the ways we're going about it. The other piece the Hawaii Community Foundation is supporting this work is training clinicians to, for example, like therapists and other social workers, to have some deeper experience in working with kids birth to 5, so that they can be called on a bit more to help consult with preschool programs and others on what they might do if there's something that kind of arises and needs to be addressed.
And a resource, and I wonder if there's such a resource in Hawaii. I know that First Things First has a website, and they put a lot of resources online for parents to do the things that you're talking about. Has Hawaii, through your organization or others, made things available for parents, particularly since everyone's sheltering in now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. One of the best resources that has been compiled since the coronavirus pandemic started for parents, and they actually have one also for early childhood educators, is on the Executive Office of Early Learning website. And Lorraine, maybe what I could do is send you the link to it, and you could maybe share it out if that's of interest. The other thing, and I don't know about First Things First, but that resource sharing component is really critical, especially getting parents involved we recently, Hawaii Community Foundation is sponsoring programs who've gone through the Promising Minds community. If they want to enroll their parents in a text-based message program, basically parents get messages 3 times a week, and it provides like a tip, a growth opportunity, and a little bit behind what the activity is with the child. And they're very simple. They're things that like you could do in when you're just at home. You don't need any special materials. But the idea behind those tips is that they are supporting ready for kindergarten, and also they have some special tips that are built in now that are around expressing big feelings and things related to what is going on for families right now. So that's been a really nice one. We have our programs participating and enrolling on, and it's brand new, so it really program started enrolling parents just in August. On Maui, I think we have like 150 families enrolled already getting those text messages. So that's also one way that we're trying to reach parents, especially when we know the primary place where a lot of the important work is happening is really at home right now.
Thank you.
I'm going to pick on a couple people. Michelle or Yoli, did we meet you in Honolulu? Were you part of the COP?
I am part of the Promising Minds group. I did take the courses. It was fabulous, but I'm not sure what I was in. I was at the Oahu group.
Okay. All right. So we have 2 groups that actually were part of that Promising Minds. The YWCA was part of it, and then Yoli's was associated with early childhood education. And we spent 9 months going through training on working with children who have experienced the disasters of childhood at times, and working with I think the core principle I walked away from was that children who are acting out in school it may be due to a trauma rather than they're just plain acting out and being a little brat. And what they did is they walked us through the whole process of, inquiry, finding out what's going on in their family. And we actually, I think Michelle can tell you, is that a couple of our kids that had what we termed as bad actors were actually kids who had been experiencing trauma, and that they were reacting the way they should be reacting when they're experiencing trauma. Our biggest takeaway that we did is that we brought on a therapist to work with the families. And we're continuing it this year, where we have children who are experiencing trauma, and we're hooking them up with services in the community. And we also have somebody on site to help our teachers and parents work together. So.
This is Junichi. I have one question. So you show that 1/3 of children has a risk of the behavioral, the problem, and so on. I think that number is very high. Is that a particular issue in Hawaii, or is that issue nationwide?
Yes, thanks for asking that question. It's based on data from a Department of Health study here in Hawaii, but coming from a national survey, the National Survey of, is it young children? I can look up or of children's health. That's the name of the survey that's done nationally. It's our best data that we have on, kind of estimating the number of children who may be at risk around behavior or developmental delays. But it's also a fairly small sample size for Hawaii, so we know it's not perfect data. So it's what we kind of work with now to estimate that number. But then looking at that in conjunction with the high number of kids that do have or have experienced adverse childhood experiences, we know that it's very possible that about 1/3. That's why we're comfortable using that number.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, if you find yourself in the middle of the night with a question that is just burning, you can email me and I'll forward it to Justina. Justina, thank you so much for coming today.
Oh, thank you, Jen.